in the not too distant past, there was a military coup in a nuclear-armed superpower. Now, I'm not actually referring to that one that you covered last week. Do you remember that one you covered last week?
There's actually quite a few countries
Yeah.
that have had that sort of. Oh, you mean Wagner?
Yeah, no, I'm
Right,
not. No,
okay.
I'm not referring to that one. But there was that when people got very excited for the space of about a day. But no, I'm not referring to that military coup in a nuclear-armed superpower. I'm referring to something else. Oh, do I have to press a button?
Press play.
No, this is good. This is all good. This is something to talk about.
Get down, Mr. President. He's going to say the word.
So for those who are listening, some chaps are shuffling around inside Senate. Is that the Senate? They're being very courteous. There's a chap with horns. He's carrying a flag.
Fucking hey, man.
And there's a police officer behind him.
Look at this guy.
Can't believe Wagner PMC would do this.
In the police officer, I notice in no danger of his life whatsoever, and he's having a bit of a chat with them.
Well, clearly this is the new president. Why would you be scared?
Yes. One of them's calling his mum, but let them know that he's in the Senate. Oh, the horns man has now taken the chair. The police officer is wandering around to have a chat. He's evidently terrified because, of course, police officers were slaughtered ruthlessly that day. And chap's still on the phone to his mum. Now the horn man is calling his mum, which is all very exciting. I think it ends about here anyway. Right, yes, so actually, I'm not even referring to that, right, because that wasn't a coup
The worst
either.
event in all of human history?
No, because that was obviously a stitch-up, and all of those people are political prisoners who have been rotting in jail for God knows how many years now. What is it, 3 years now? And they're not even being charged and given their court dates. So that is a massive stitch up. So no, I'm not talking about that, the Wagner one or that one. I am actually going to talk about a genuine coup. The moment when a quasi-military organization took over a country on behalf of a permanent establishment or the deep state. A moment that a democratically elected president was assassinated. Right, and ever since that, the deep state has been wearing democracy like a skin suit, basically. So there is democracy, but only up to a point, and only when it doesn't threaten the interests of, the powerful vested interests. Let's look at that moment. So I'm showing you footage from a sunny day in Dallas, Texas. It's November 22nd. 1963. We've got a presidential cavalcade coming around the corner, waving to the crowd, and basically we had to stop it there. Otherwise, we would get age.
Something happened.
Yes, something happened.
Local man lost his head.
Yes, we would get age appropriate restricted if I carried on that clip for one more second. So yes, so yeah, I'll cut that just in time, but coups genuinely have happened in these countries. Now, I'm going to build my case here. I'm going to start
So
off.
hang on, let's get this straight. You're
Yes.
saying that the assassination of JFK was a coup by some group.
Yeah, a quasi-military internal organization. It is a genuine coup. It is a genuine coup. Right. Let's start my case on this with Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, Dwight, he was a 5-star general. He was a World War II hero who later became president. So
local
he is
nobody.
What?
Local nobody.
Yes. So he is a man who genuinely understands the military and the government, because you're a 5-star general, president of the United States. That's a pretty good CV. You could get some after dinner speaking gigs with that. So
Probably work at McDonald's.
he felt the need in his farewell address of 1961 to issue a warning about the rise of the military-industrial complex, a force which he feared could take control of American democracy. His words were ominous on this. It was a prophecy of battle to come. So let's see what Dwight had to say.
From the White House in the office of the President of the United States, we present an address by Dwight D. Eisenhower. This is the farewell address for President Eisenhower, whose 8 years as chief executive come to an end at noon Friday. Mr. Eisenhower has chosen this time for his final speech. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Okay, so let's just pull that apart a little bit, shall we? As I'm just going to recap that line at a time, because I think that is pretty significant. So, in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Right? So it's pretty clear what his concern is there. Okay, the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Right? We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or our democratic processes. So clearly, this well-qualified man genuinely believed that there was a ever-present clear danger to the liberties and democratic process when he gave that speech. Right? We should take nothing for granted. He then goes on to say, only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. So here's a question for our American viewers. Does the American school system and the American mainstream media in combination produce alert and knowledgeable citizens?
It's not meant to.
No, I think that's fair to say. I think it's the case that alert and knowledgeable citizens are basically pushed to the fringes, called conspiracy theorists, and removed from the public ear. As per your last segment, in the UK, they are now being debanked and basically forced to leave the country if they question the system in any way. So being alert and knowledgeable in the current West is basically rather hazardous. So the key defense, which Dwight outlined there, has been thoroughly dismantled so that we can't basically question this stuff. So anyway, that's my setup for this. Enter John F. Kennedy. So he's a young, charismatic president, and he decides that he's going to take on this behemoth. Now, JFK came into office with suspicions about the unchecked power of the intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA. And the JFK was said to have been so furious after the Bay of Pigs incident, an operation which was planned and executed by the CIA, that he privately vowed to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces, right, and scatter it to the winds. Now, if you want to go deeper on what I'm talking about, there is I would go and look at the Joe Rogan interview with RFK. RFK is JFK's nephew, and he basically breaks down the whole timeline of what happened there, about how JFK wasn't really up for the invasion of Cuba, but the CIA pushed it relentlessly and lied to him at every step in order to get his acquisition to go one step further, and were constantly lying and trying to put him into a situation where he had to go into full military escalation. And it was this event that made JFK realize that the CIA could not be trusted, and resulted in the firing of Allen Dulles, the chief of the CIA. So the CIA is an institution. It's deeply entwined with the fabric of American power structures, and they were not really prepared to sort of let that happen. So that's why we had the incident we showed you in the video, the November 1922. November 22nd of 1963, Dallas, Texas, JFK is assassinated. Now, the official narrative put the blame on Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone gunman. But, for those who question the official story, Oswald is a rather convenient scapegoat in all of this. the precision of that shot. If you've ever spoken to somebody who knows their guns,
I never got into the JFK thing,
yeah,
so I don't really know anything about it.
there is a bit of magic trajectory going on in order to get off those 3 shots from his position. So it is rather suspicious. Then, of course, we had the incredibly swift cleanup and removal of the president's body, and it all sort of points to a sort of coordinated operation. Now, of course, so we got Oswald, we got him in custody, and then 2 days later, Jack Ruby basically intercepts Oswald as he's being transferred from the prison van and shoots him dead.
Why?
Because apparently he was outraged about him shooting the president. That's the official story. So he was a nightclub owner and low-level mafioso, and he felt
Why would he care?
Well, apparently he did. And then Jack Ruby, of course, went to jail, and he was considered to be of sound mind at the time he did. Everybody who knew him knew he was of sound mind. And then he was visited in prison by somebody from the CIA, and after that he developed severe mental issues, and has been sort of babbling incoherently ever after. Here's the Tucker segment on this. Let's see what Tucker has to say.
A lone gunman murders the president of the United States, and then, less than 48 hours later, that lone gunman is himself murdered by another lone gunman. What are the odds of that? It's one thing if you get struck by lightning, rare but possible. But if every member of your family also gets struck by lightning all on different days, you might begin to suspect these are not entirely natural events. But oh, replied the US government, they are. This bizarre chain of killings was all entirely natural. So less than a year after the JFK assassination, the Johnson White House released something called the Warren Commission Report. And the report concluded that while their motives remained unclear, both Lee Oswald and Jack Ruby had acted alone. No one helped them. There was no conspiracy of any kind. Case closed. Time to move on. And many Americans did move on. At the time, they had no idea how shoddy and corrupt the Warren Commission was. It would be nearly 50 years before the CIA admitted under duress that, in fact, it had withheld information from investigators about its relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald.
So, as Tucker mentions there, the Warren Commission comes next on this, and it is tasked with investigating the JFK assassination. Right? Lyndon B. Johnson himself, who assumed the presidency after JFK, he personally appoints the committee members. Now, remember I mentioned that JFK's primary feud was with Allen Dulles, the former CIA chief who basically lied to him, and then JFK said, right, we're gonna get rid of the CIA. And he fired Allen Dulles. Now, Allen Dulles was then out of the picture in terms of, sitting behind a desk, but of course he had all of the network, all of the connections. He was sort of viewed as the sort of unofficial chief from beyond the wall type. So he still had all the connections. So the primary suspect in a lot of this is obviously going to be Allen Dulles. Now, can you guess who Lyndon Johnson appoints to head up the Warren Commission? It is Allen Dulles. Yes, so he gets appointed to look into this bit of a conflict of interest, we might say. The Warren Commission then does a sort of very nice whitewash on this, wraps it all up. I think we've got one more bit on Tucker from that.
It was at that point, as Americans started to doubt the official story, that the term conspiracy theory entered our lexicon. As Professor Lance DeHaven Smith points out in his book on the subject, the term conspiracy theory did not exist as a phrase in everyday American conversation before 1964. In 1964, the year the Warren Commission issued its report, the New York Times published 5 stories in which conspiracy theory appeared. Now, today, of course, the term conspiracy theory appears in pretty much every New York Times story about American politics. It's wielded, now as then, as a weapon against anyone who asks questions the government doesn't feel like answering.
That's suspicious. Now let's bring into this story Bobby Kennedy, okay? So Bobby Kennedy is JFK's brother. He's the younger brother of JFK. Now, we know from RFK, who's running for president, of course, at the moment, that the moment that Bobby saw that his brother had been murdered in this way, the very first thing he did was pick up the phone to the CIA and say, did you do this? He had been appointed by JFK to basically do some reforms on a lot of this stuff, on the justice system and the intelligence operatives. So he basically knew what they were up to in many cases on this. So what he did was he decided that he was going to run for president himself, and he was going to run on a platform of ending the Vietnam War and basically reigning in the intelligence services.
He's literally running on, they killed my brother.
Well, sort of, yes. And
Right.
and also we're going to take away the power of the military-industrial complex by shutting down the Vietnam War and the people who feed the top of the hopper, which is the CIA. So he runs on that platform, and he does rather well, actually. He wins the Democratic Party nomination, and he gives his victory speech just after winning it in the pantry of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. So he's just won the nomination. He's probably going to win the presidency. And after he leaves his speech, he then basically goes out through the back, escorted by his security team. He goes through the kitchen, at which point he is shot 13 times in the back, apparently by some Palestinian chap who worked in the kitchen for reasons we don't particularly know why. And after searching this Palestinian chap, they discovered a gun on his person which holds 6 bullets. And he was stood in front of.
So he reloaded twice.
And, well, yes.
Well, 3 times technically.
He got lazy on the last reload and just put the 1 bullet in. And also he managed to fire his bullets in a way that even though he was stood in front of Bobby, he managed to get them into Bobby's back, which is quite impressive shooting.
Ricochets?
Something like that. So RFK has visited this man in jail since, and he's convinced that he did not kill his father. Now you might think, this man has a vested interest, because if you're going to be sitting down in front of the man who is supposed to have killed your father, there's going to be no love lost in that situation. But he's told him straight up, I don't believe you did this, and shaken his hand. So RFK is now running for president, but that's a different story. The next part in the in this particular story is I'm going to ask you to consider the HSCA, which is the House Select Committee on Assassinations. So this was established.
Well, they ordered them, or
Well, it did JFK and Martin Luther. That's the approach it came on. Now, this was a few years later. This was in 1976, and it looked into the investigation of the JFK and the Martin Luther one. And the committee released its final report in 1979. Right, and it was a bipartisan agreement as well. Now, they concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. Again, bipartisan agreement here. Looking into this without with as much of the original evidence as they could pull together. However, the committee stated that they were unable to identify the other gunman or the extent of the conspiracy. These were the guys who sort of said, there probably was a second gunman in the JFK shooting. It further concluded that scientific acoustic evidence established the high probability that there were 2 gunmen who fired at JFK. And other scientific evidence that they brought into that. The committee believed, on this basis available to it, that President JFK was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, blah, blah, blah. The committee found that the original federal investigation was seriously flawed in respect to information sharing. Basically, there was a whitewash. Another interesting angle I always find on this is Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet leader at the time. So he was Soviet leader at the time, and he basically had a good relationship with JFK, and they were talking because they were able to have this report, and they were talking about de-escalation, military de-escalation. And according to his son Sergei Khrushchev, Nikita took it quite hard at the assassination, because he thought, okay, well, this is our chance for peace and de-escalation based on
because it was
blown out
bankrupting the Soviet Union. They couldn't actually keep up with the Americans.
Yeah, I mean, so that would be the most favourable spin that you could put on it. The other one could be that maybe he wasn't an utter psychopath and didn't want, never-ending military escalation. So anyway, a short while later, a reporter decided to ask Khrushchev what he thought of the assassination, and he paused for quite a long time thinking about how he's going to answer it, and then he simply says, "Think about who benefits." Because he didn't benefit, but he was asking who does benefit. So that's a good question. Who does benefit from the assassination of JFK? Here's 3 names I'm going to throw at you. Alan Dulles, we've already mentioned him, former chief of the CIA. Lyndon B. Johnson, obviously. he became president, and he probably would have had to have been in on this because he had to appoint Alan Dulles to the Warren Commission to do the cover up, and Alan Dulles was of course reappointed after this. And the other chap is Douglas Dillon. He was JFK's Secretary of the Treasury, and he basically was in charge of the Secret Service on that day, and they were basically extremely poorly organized in a way that sort of made this very accessible. Another question of who benefits would be the military-industrial complex. So it's worth talking about, how did the military-industrial complex benefit out of all of this? Well, first thing, escalation of the Vietnam War. That's a pretty big one. Growth of the defense industry, significantly. Expansion of the intelligence community. Increased military spending. Because, of course, ever since then, military spending has increased, on an ongoing basis to being well over $1 trillion at this point. Now, there's only been, apart from this period of JFK, there's only ever been one short period in US history where the president has refused to start any new war and has decided to favor de-escalation as opposed to escalation. And I'm referring, of course, to
Donald Trump.
Exactly. A man who has basically got Democratic and MSM sponsorship in order to get him to be the Republican nominee in 2016 because they thought he would be an easy win. And then it turned out he wasn't an easy win. And when he ran for re-election, he was the only president ever to basically get an increased vote share on his second term. And I was watching the betting markets that night because I had a bet on Trump, and I saw the live odds on him as they counted the votes going up and up and up until he was like 5x likely to beat Joe Biden. So the betting markets were, very clear. This man is going to win the election for the second time. Then about 3 a.m. happened.
Then he lost.
Yes. And things happened. It turned out that at that point he was up against the most popular president of all time. A man a man so popular we now realise that the only reason Obama won is because he had Joe Biden as his VP. So, I would just ask you this: it is literally the CIA's job, and nobody disputes this. It is literally the CIA's job to carry out assassinations, to destabilize countries, to conduct color revolutions, to manipulate elections abroad, obviously, outside of the US.
That regulation about banking and sanctioning people was meant to be used abroad as well.
Yes, interesting point. Yes. Now, the reason the CIA do this, of course, is to serve US interests. And I'm just thinking, isn't it jolly lucky that at no point during any of their history has anyone at the CIA get confused at where exactly the boundaries are between the US interests and their own lie? Now, if you would like to learn more about this, go to the website where Bo has written a bloody fantastic article on the JFK thing. So if you're like Callum and you've never really looked at this one, go and read that article, and it will make the case that I've made only significantly better and well written and so on. So basically, summing up, yes, coups do happen in military superpower, nuclear armed military superpowers. But I'm not referring to the one in Russia, and I'm not referring to the one when people wandered around the Senate with horns on their head. This stuff actually happens, and maybe democracy, like I say, has been worn as a skin suit ever since.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the behind the scenes and building the new studio. If you'd like to see what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.